This conversation was never meant to be made public, not in any book, not in any published article. And yet, somehow, it survived like a memory, still vibrating somewhere in the energy field of the universe. One cold night at the end of 1942, in a small room inside the New Yorker hotel, where he spent the final years of his life, Nikola Tesla, the silent genius the world once called a man ahead of his time, agreed to an unusual interview, not about alternating current, not about inventions, but about the questions no one dared ask him in public: death, the soul, reincarnation, and the ultimate freedom of human consciousness. The recorder clicked softly. The interviewer remained anonymous. No images, no signatures, just a worn-out audio tape, distorted, yet hauntingly real. Tesla's voice emerged, faint and yet strangely unwavering, as if he no longer belonged to that frail, aging body, as if he was speaking from somewhere else, where time had already dissolved. And the first question, asked that night, was the one most of us have whispered silently to ourselves: Mr. Tesla, what happens to the soul after we leave this world? The room was quiet, not the kind of silence you hear when no one is speaking, but the kind of silence that presses into your chest, a silence that feels like something is listening, watching. Tesla sat by the window, staring into the dim glow of the New York skyline. His eyes didn't look at the lights, they looked beyond them, as if following a current only he could feel. He spoke softly. Everything that has ever happened still exists. Nothing is ever truly lost. Every word, every thought, every vibration, they echo forever in what I call the luminous ether. Today, some call it the Akashic Records, a field of memory that holds every experience, every soul's journey, every hidden truth, woven into the very structure of time and space. To Tesla, it wasn't mysticism, it was physics. He believed that our minds were not the source of thought, but receivers of it, like radios tuned into invisible frequencies that surround us constantly. The brain, he said, is merely a conductor. The real signal, the truth, comes from elsewhere. Decades before quantum theory became popular, Tesla was already speaking about vibrational fields, energy beyond light, intelligence without form. He believed the universe was a living archive, and that every soul leaves behind an imprint, a signature frequency that can be read again if you learn how to listen. He was once asked if he feared death. Tesla smiled. Not at all, he said. You see, nothing truly dies. It only shifts its frequency. This belief wasn't born from religion. It came from his own experiments, his late-night observations of unseen forces, his encounters with what he described as light without source, sound without vibration, memory without mind. He believed the Akashic field wasn't up in the sky. It was here, around us, within us, flowing like an unseen ocean, carrying everything we've ever been and everything we've ever forgotten. And perhaps that's the real reason he lived the way he did. Alone, obsessed with frequency, haunted by light, not because he was lost, but because he was trying to remember. They say he slept only 2 hours a night, not because he couldn't rest, but because something was calling him from the silence, from the space between waking and dreaming. In those long hours, Tesla conducted experiments no one ever documented in patents. No circuits, no machines, just energy and thought. He once described lying perfectly still in a darkened room, surrounded by copper coils, no wires, no electricity, only resonance. And in those moments, he claimed to see images, faces he'd never met, languages he'd never learned, memories that weren't his. Or maybe they were, just not from this life. There are frequencies, he whispered, that do not belong to matter, but to memory itself. Tesla believed the soul is an energy field, subtle and intelligent, encoded with every experience it has ever lived across lifetimes, and he believed that, under the right conditions, these memories could be accessed not by force, but by frequency. He began studying what he called the sympathetic vibration of thought. Just like tuning forks resonate when brought close, he believed that thoughts from the past, even from other lives, could be heard if the mind became still enough. This wasn't metaphor to him, it was engineering. To Tesla, a human being was not just flesh and blood. We were instruments, capable of receiving echoes from past dimensions of self. If we were quiet enough to hear, every soul, he said, is a library of light, and light is never lost, only buried beneath noise. He spoke of magnetic fields around the human heart, of pulses so subtle they could move through walls, even through time. Years later, modern science would confirm that the heart emits an electromagnetic field up to 60 times stronger than the brain's, that our thoughts are electrical, but our emotions, they're magnetic. Tesla already knew this. He once said that grief was not sadness, but a distortion in memory, the soul struggling to reconnect to something it once held and can no longer feel. That's why he believed many people feel a deep pain they can't explain. It's not depression. It's not failure. It's a memory unspoken and unresolved, rising from the soul. He believed the cure was not forgetting, but remembering. Tesla once said, "The mind is not the keeper of truth. The soul is, but the soul forgets because it must." There's a strange kind of mercy in forgetting. When we are born, we don't arrive with a scroll of all our past lives. We don't remember the people we loved, the betrayals we endured, the choices we made, or the promises we broke, and perhaps that's by design. To remember too much, too soon, might break the heart before it ever learns to open. So the soul forgets, not because it is weak, but because it is wise. Tesla believed this forgetting was not a flaw. It was a protective veil, a soft layer placed over the deepest wounds of the soul, so we could begin again, so we could choose freely, without being trapped by the weight of what came before. But even so, the past never truly disappears. It lingers, not in words, but in patterns. We see it in the relationships we're drawn to, the fears we can't explain, the dreams that return again and again, the moments when our emotions are too big for the present moment because they come from somewhere else. Tesla called this the echo of unresolved light. He believed our lives repeat certain themes, not because fate is cruel, but because the soul is trying to remember what it came here to learn. When we forget who we were, he said, we recreate the same story, hoping to awaken. And sometimes that awakening comes through pain, a heartbreak that feels older than the body, a grief that doesn't make sense, an emptiness that no achievement can fill. Tesla believed these were not signs of failure. They were soul signals, fragments rising from the Akashic field, trying to get our attention. The forgetting, he said, is not permanent. It is only the first part of the journey, because eventually there comes a moment, quiet, unexpected, when something inside us says, "I've been here before. I've felt this before. I know this place, even if I don't remember why." And in that moment, the veil begins to lift, not all at once, but just enough to guide us home. Forgetting can be a blessing, but when it lasts too long, it becomes a trap. Tesla once paused mid-sentence during a quiet conversation. He closed his eyes, as if hearing something from far away. Then he said, "A soul that forgets for too many lifetimes begins to wander, not through space, but through repetition. You can live 5 lives, then 100, But if the lessons are not learned, if the patterns go unnoticed, you don't really move forward. You just move in circles. That's how suffering becomes cyclical. The same heartbreak, the same abandonment, the same silence where love should have been. We think it's bad luck or poor judgment, but Tesla saw it differently. To him, these repeating wounds weren't random. They were loops of unresolved energy, echoes from lifetimes where the soul left something unfinished, a truth unspoken, a boundary uncrossed, a forgiveness never granted. And when we forget, we repeat, we marry the same kind of person. We sabotage our joy the same way. We shrink at the same threshold of power, not because we're broken, but because the soul is trying to show us where it last fell asleep. Tesla believed these loops were not punishments. They were calls to consciousness. Each time the soul forgets, he said, the lesson grows louder until remembering becomes the only way out. But here's the paradox. You can't force memory. You can only become ready. And readiness looks nothing like control. It looks like stillness, like choosing differently, like walking away when your old self would have stayed. Sometimes the memory doesn't return as a vision. It returns as a knowing, a quiet refusal to go back to the old pain. That's how you know you're not in the prison anymore. Because the cell was never locked. It was made of unremembered stories. And the moment you choose a new path, you begin to dissolve the bars, one truth at a time. Not all prisons have bars. Some are made of forgetting soft, silent, and invisible. The kind that wraps around you slowly. The kind that makes you live small without ever realizing it. Tesla believed the most dangerous form of captivity was not oppression from the outside, but disconnection from within. The moment a soul forgets itself, he once said, it begins to obey things it never agreed to. Obey timelines, obey fear, obey stories passed down, generation after generation. That whisper, you are not enough. You must earn your worth. But the soul does not obey. It remembers, and it's in the remembering, subtle, sacred, and often painful, that we begin to return to ourselves. For Tesla, memory was not mental. It was vibrational. He spoke of a frequency buried beneath the noise of everyday life, a signal your soul emits constantly, but the world trains you to ignore. He believed that each of us carries within us what he called the echo of the original self. It cannot be erased, only covered over by culture, trauma, routine, expectation, but it waits. And when we become still enough, when we stop performing and start listening, something ancient rises to the surface, not a fact, not a name, but a knowing you are not lost. Tesla whispered once, you are only out of resonance. He compared the soul to a crystal tuning fork. When exposed to the right vibration, it begins to sing again, to harmonize, to vibrate with the music it was always meant to carry. And what does that music sound like? It sounds like ease, like clarity, like the quiet decision to finally stop explaining yourself, to stop seeking permission, to walk away from what shrinks you, even if you don't have a plan yet. Remembering is not dramatic. It often begins in ordinary moments. You wake up one morning and feel tired of pretending. You drive past a place and your chest tightens, not from fear, but from something deeper, recognition. Tesla believed these moments were more real than anything measured in volts or time, because in those flashes of recognition, we are not learning something new. We are retrieving something sacred, something our soul chose to forget in order to grow. You had to forget, he said, because you were not ready to carry the truth before. But now, you are. And what is that truth? That you've been whole this entire time. That the emptiness you feel is not a flaw, but the space memory will return to. That the freedom you seek is not ahead of you. It is beneath you, woven into the Nsar. went into the roots of your being, waiting to be remembered. Tesla warned that without memory, we mistake movement for progress. We chase goals. We collect titles. We keep busy, but never arrive. Because without memory, the soul cannot choose freely. It only reacts, but once remembering begins, something shifts. You no longer follow the loudest voice. You follow the quietest one. You no longer seek answers. You become the question. You no longer ask, "Who will love me if I change?" You whisper, "Who am I, really?" beneath the need to be loved. This is the true beginning of liberation, not escape from life, but full presence within it, to cry and not feel weak, to rest and not feel guilty, to walk away from pain, not because you're numb, but because you finally know what your soul is worth. Tesla believed this remembering was not rare. It was inevitable, a built-in mechanism of awakening, triggered by longing, heartbreak, and mystery. One day, he said, you will remember yourself so clearly that you will no longer be able to return to who you were pretending to be. And in that moment, you are free, not because you've escaped the world, but because you've returned to your essence, to the silent, sovereign, radiant self that was never truly lost, only waiting. Tesla never called it the Akashic Records, but what he described, a field of light, vibration, and memory beyond time, matches almost perfectly what mystics and metaphysicists have whispered about for centuries. He believed that if the soul carries memory, then there must also be a way to access it, not with machines, but with the body, with stillness, with frequency. The soul, Tesla said, is not a container. It is a receiver. And what it receives, when properly tuned, is remembrance. In his final notebooks, long after the world had stopped listening, Tesla wrote about what he called silent retrieval states. No wires, no devices, just resonance. He listed 3 conditions. 1. Deep stillness. Tesla believed that movement distorts subtle frequency, just as static interferes with a radio signal. Mental chatter blocks the gentle transmissions of the Akashic field. He would sit for hours without moving, not meditating in the Eastern sense, but emptying, slowing the breath, allowing the nervous system to settle into a frequency low enough to feel what does not speak. In stillness, he wrote, the past knocks gently. 2. Pure intention. Tesla insisted that intention wasn't desire. It wasn't wanting answers. It was resonance, a sincere longing to remember for the sake of truth, not for control. He believed the Akashic field was intelligent and only responded to alignment, not force, not curiosity, but clarity. The records are not locked, he said. They are veiled. They lift when the heart is honest. 3. Harmonic frequency. Tesla experimented with sound, not just mechanical waves, but tones that matched natural fields of the body. He believed that certain frequencies, particularly in the 7, Sfar range, what we now know as the Schumann resonance, had the power to unlock inner states of memory. He would sometimes hum to himself, not random notes, but sustained vibrations, as if his voice could tune his cells into something he once knew. Today, researchers talk about binaural beats, theta wave states, and the use of 528 hertz for emotional healing. But Tesla spoke of this nearly a century ago. He believed the body was a bridge, the heart was the doorway, and frequency was the key. Some say Tesla died alone, but maybe he had already crossed the boundary. Maybe his final years weren't a descent into madness, but an ascent into memory, because before he passed, he wrote something that was never published. It was found scribbled in the margins of an old notebook. It said, one day, you will close your eyes, and instead of darkness, You will see light, and in that light, the story you thought you lost will return to you. He left no blueprint, no guide, only echoes. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we were never meant to learn the Akashic, but to remember it gently, through silence, through longing, through resonance. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with an answer. It begins with a memory, one that doesn't arrive through the mind, but through the body. A woman named Claire, age 52, woke up one morning with tears already on her cheeks. There was no dream, no reason, just a weight in her chest, ancient, aching, familiar. For years, she had carried a fear of abandonment. In relationships, in friendships, even in crowded rooms. She told herself it was childhood trauma. She read all the books, but nothing changed. One day, in a deep breathwork session, something shifted. She saw herself in another time, wearing clothes she didn't recognize, running across a field toward a man who never turned around. She felt a panic so intense she couldn't breathe. When she opened her eyes, she whispered, just 3 words, "I've lost him." And somehow, it made sense, not the logic, but the feeling. The grief wasn't new. It was remembered. Claire didn't need proof. She needed permission to cry for something her soul had once known, to honor a loss that never made it into this life story, but had lived quietly in her nervous system all along. That night, for the first time in decades, she slept through the night. The fear didn't vanish, but it softened, because now it had a name, a place, a history, and when pain has context, it begins to move. Another woman, Marla, age 49, had always felt drawn to the ocean, terrified of drowning, but unable to stay away from water. On a quiet retreat in Big Sur, she sat before the Pacific and asked out loud, "Why do I love this?" and fear it at the same time. That night, she dreamt she was on a ship. Storm, wind, screams. The sea pulled her under. She woke gasping, but strangely calm, because for the first time, the fear had a face, a beginning, an origin story. She later said, "It wasn't about the drowning. It was about remembering that I survived something before, that I carried it. And now I could let it go." Since that day, she began swimming again, not to fight the fear, but to honor the memory. Tesla believed memory was not a flashback. It was a frequency shift, a return to resonance. When you remember, he said, you come back into alignment with your soul's true path. And when that happens, everything begins to change. Relationships that once drained you no longer hold power. You stop begging to be seen because you start seeing yourself. You speak with more softness, but also more certainty. You stop performing. You start breathing. Remembering doesn't erase the past. It reclaims it. It lets the wound become a doorway, the fear become a teacher, the silence become a sacred space. These women didn't remember to impress anyone. They didn't write books. They didn't go viral. But their lives became quieter, deeper, more whole. And maybe that's the miracle. Not that you become someone new, but that you finally return to the person your soul has always known you to be. Tesla never feared death, not because he denied it, but because he understood it differently. To him, death was not an ending. It was a return, not to a place, but to a vibration, a state of coherence, where the soul remembers itself so completely. There is nothing left to resist. He believed that once a soul truly remembers, not just who it was, but why it came, it becomes something else. Liberation, he said, is not escape. It is expansion. It is the moment the soul stops being a visitor and becomes light again. In his final days, he spoke less and less. He sat by the window of his hotel room, watching the city flicker beneath him. But his gaze was far beyond the skyline. His journals became quieter too, fewer diagrams, more poetry. Lines like, "The further I go within, the less I need from without. I am dissolving, but I am not disappearing. I am becoming memory, but not the kind that fades, the kind that glows." He believed that beyond memory, there is merging, a state where all lifetimes fold into one frequency, no longer fractured by time, no longer searching for meaning, just presence, just peace. Tesla imagined this as a return to the original field, what mystics called the divine, what science might one day call the unified field, a place where energy and love are indistinguishable, where memory is not needed, because nothing is forgotten, nothing is separate. You are not here to accumulate. He once said, "You are here to remember, so you can return, not with regret, but with light." He believed that every soul would eventually reach this point, not through achievement, but through awakening, through 1,000 lifetimes of learning, of forgetting, of loving, of losing, of choosing again. And at the end, when the remembering is complete, we don't vanish, we shine, not as a person, not as a name, but as what we always were underneath it all, a spark returning to the source. If you've felt something stir in you during this story, something soft and familiar, like the trace of a forgotten song, that is not coincidence. That is memory, your own. And maybe you're not here to be fixed. Maybe you're here to remember, to forgive yourself for what you never understood, to rest, to return, and to shine quietly, beautifully, into the life that's been waiting for you all along. The end is not the end. It is the homecoming. Thank you for being here, not just in this video, but in this life. If you're ready to continue remembering, you are not alone. This is just the beginning. If something in this story touched a quiet part of you, a memory you couldn't quite name, a truth you've always felt, but never had the words for, know this: you are not imagining it. You are remembering. And if that remembering feels tender, or even a little overwhelming, take your time. There is no rush on the soul's path. But if you'd like to keep walking this journey with stories that speak not to who you've been, but to who you're becoming, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe if it feels right, not for the algorithm, but for the quiet moments where truth arrives softly between the noise. And if this message reminded you of someone who might also be remembering, share it. Not because they need to change, but because they deserve to feel less alone. Thank you for being here. Truly, sometimes, just by listening, you bring your light back online. And that is where everything begins.